why do people have Hoover hope? So what's happening in your brain when you trauma bond with a cluster B? And then why it's so hard to get away? And even if you do get away, like you break away or they discard you, then why is it so hard to get over that? And there's many reasons, but right now I'm just going to focus on what's going on in people's brains. The outsiders and all those people in people's lives who say, well, why don't you just get over it already? Or why do you keep going back to that person? Or because they don't understand what you're really going through. And they probably have never been through anything like that, so they just don't understand. So other people think it's just a simple, logical decision to walk away from anyone that poses or causes any psychological threat or damage. But the reasons that people end up staying entangled in harmful relationships are really complex. And so it's not so simple as just saying your behavior is unacceptable, or this violated my boundary, or hey, you cheated on me, that's a deal breaker, and I'm leaving, because some people have real struggles with this and for legitimate reasons. It means that leaving an abuser is not solely a cognitive decision. So it's not just based on thinking, but it's tied to neurochemical, psychological, and emotional anchors. And when it comes to the brain, when given the choice to follow emotions or logic in circumstances like these, the brain follows emotions, which isn't always the most helpful thing. It all starts at the beginning of these relationships, obviously, right? They seem so great. They seem like somebody they're not. Intermittent reinforcement is so super powerful and addicting. Trauma bonding, it was identified in around, I think, 1981 by Dr. Donald Dutton and Susan Painter. It was a theory that they posed, but I think it's way more than a theory now. But in their theory, it explained that there are two features within abusive relationships that seem to strongly seal the emotional attachment. Remember that attachment is a trauma bond that many victims have to an abuser. Power differential and the intermittent style of bad-good treatment are those two main things. So it's an emotional roller coaster, and the brain of the victim, or your brain, responds to everything that's going on. The neurochemistry can increase the bond and attachment to an abusive person. Many with cluster B, some people with BPD and of course narcissists and beyond, but like many with BPD too, and different motivations, but they have this, all about power and me kind of approach. And many with BPD don't realize this, but they can still do it like in a more overcompensatory way, not quite as controlling or seemingly, in charge, so to speak, as perhaps a narcissist or a psychopath. But they require this dominant position. Often a person with BPD might show a really dependent position, but they will overcompensate usually at times with a dominant position, or they may stay in a more needy sort of, really dependent position. But whichever way this goes, it's to ensure that they get what they need, right? Supply in the narcissist case, a lot of different things in the case of somebody with BPD, but it's manipulation and emotional abuse, and it can also rise to physical violence. So this unreasonable control that's needed over partners in one way or another leaves people trying to struggle to establish a cooperative or fair relationship. So there's some non-psychological and non-neurological factors, but right now, I think a lot of people know what they are. The trauma bond, which is also a type of bond, but it's not based on love. When you get into these relationships, feel such a strong connection and gone through many ups and downs, and then you feel like you really just love this person so much. I mean, that's what clients are telling me all the time. That's what comments to the channel and my different videos of mine reflect. You really, really just love this person. Really loving somebody who's abusing you. And this might mean that, people believe that this means that you're meant to be together. But of course, there's a lot more going on subconsciously in those who are trauma bonded to a person with BPD, NPD, or even a psychopath, that that really drives a lot of what's happening inside of you that can be subconscious for you as well. Many people ascribe that this abuser that they're in a relationship to, or person like with BPD that's abusive and untreated, as a soulmate, right? This status, they give soulmate status to this person based on the chemistry they feel with them. You may believe or have believed that you've been loved in return. And bonding is not always a synonym for love. And chemistry can be extremely strong even with the wrong person. The human brain is able to connect to negative sources, sometimes even with more intensity than positive safe sources. And that goes back again, usually to family of origin, childhood issues and trauma, and what's happening subconsciously in the inner child of so many people that are with cluster Bs and going through this after a relationship. So it's really important to know that because some bonds are detrimental and not based on love at all. So neuroscience underlying this crippling trauma bond with people who are in relationship with often stressed are narcissists or psychopaths, but this is true for people in relationships with BPD too, especially when they're untreated. So there's a lot of psychological symptoms. There's underlying brain functions that are responsible for people's behavior. And two of the most prominent neurochemicals linked to traumatic bonding are dopamine and oxytocin. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that's associated with several functions due to the presence of two general types of dopamine receptors. Now, I'm not going to go into the deep level of all the neurobiological information with that. Through these receptors, dopamine can be involved in many different actions and behaviors, like, for example, even movement disorders, emotions, mental illness, well, what they always refer to as mental illness. It's distress and abuse. And oxytocin is a neuropeptide and a hormone that is synthesized in the hypothalamus. And many have termed it the cuddle hormone. But it's quite like dopamine, and it has a wide range of actions. And depending on the brain regions and social stimuli present, oxytocin can even have some negative effects on behavior and actions. So all this is going on with brain chemistry. In the aftermath of these cluster B relationship, for many, oxytocin and dopamine become imbalanced and unregulated. By the way, this is not so unlike what happens with these two, the neurotransmitter and the neuropeptide I mentioned, to people with BPD and what's going on with their behavior too, because it's all about trauma. The neurochemical changes will place the victim in a tough position because dopamine and oxytocin can lead to so many different actions that place your safety at risk. So lots of people know, hey, this person with BPD, this narcissist, this psychopath, and I'm not saying they're all the same, but they're no good for me, and like, what am I doing? And like, but your brain is really, working against you there. So the imbalance of chemistry can cause the victim to experience intense cravings and wanting that partner, wanting them back to hoover, hope, etc. Thoughts will often follow then you have obsessive thoughts that are often following to try to make sense of your feelings and your behavior and why you haven't just walked away. It's like your head knows, like, intellectually, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. But it's just not that simple, because trauma bonding really is trauma bonding, and it affects your neurobiology and your psychology and your mental health and the way that you think. It's just, it overtakes people, really. And people try to rationalize the behaviors of the abuser because they can't figure out why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. And that's why I think so many people get into the false hope that later becomes Hoover hope of, well, they're trying, or even now, I hear a lot from clients too that, well, he or she is in therapy, or they discarded me and they just started therapy. But remember, a lot of these people are not going to therapy for the right reasons. A lot of them aren't with the right type or specialists in this area of mental health or trauma, really more to the point. So just because somebody goes to therapy is like the horse that you've led to water, or that decides to go to the water but never takes a drink. Staying when logic says go. boy, do people go through this and then have a really hard time and feel really bad about themselves. And in some cases, unfortunately, people really lose their lives to this because they can't make sense out of staying or the Hoover hope or the self-hoovering of the ex, when the brain, when you know somewhere inside, logic says I gotta go, but I can't go because all the obsessive thinking and all what your brain is doing. And the brain's reward system is often the motivation behind your decision. It's not really a decision, but to stay. And unfortunately, this has led to negative consequences for so many people. And like I said, so many people lose their lives to this. They take their lives. It's extremely difficult to think clearly, number one, when you've been stressed, abused, and traumatized, but also because oxytocin and dopamine place such importance and value on that person, that abuser. So the combination of neurochemistry with endogenous opioids can create an addictive attachment that's difficult to break, which is really the essence of what a trauma bond is. And for the person who's developed post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, their return to the abuser will worsen their mental health and physical health. And having reactions of craving, dependence, withdrawal can occur even after you've been aware that logically this person is dangerous for you and not a desirable mate, partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, or even friend or mother or whatever the relationship type is. So the decision to stay is not really such a clear decision at all. It rather is an addictive response that the brain can have to a relationship of this type. And this is predicated on usually some level of trauma, varying levels of trauma, and people's early childhood. So this could happen to anyone after a toxic relationship though, but particularly for those who have an attachment that makes them vulnerable to an intimate partner. So different attachments are involved in that too. Dependency and avoidance of withdrawal. Well, due to the surge of oxytocin and dopamine, the victim will require a connection to the abusive individual to keep from going through the painful feelings of withdrawal, because you have become dependent. And this particular dependency, it's really important to note, is not codependence. Now, codependence often exists with this other really sort of brain-driven, neuropeptides and neurotransmitter-driven chemical soup of dependence. So it's not always just a codependency. This particular neurochemical dependency is a reflection of the same neurocircuitry we associate with drug dependence. So that withdrawal that people are feeling and have described, and you might still be dealing with, really is the withdrawal of an addiction, but it's not like you took a drug, but it's the sort of, quote, drugs, unquote, that work in our systems. And symptoms of withdrawal, craving the toxic relationship or the abusive individual or the borderline, the narcissist, or the psychopath, deciding to stay are not a reflection of personal weakness on the part of the person being victimized and traumatized by someone else. So it's simply normal brain response to an abnormal situation. The kindness abuse mixture, in with those with BP, the mean sweet cycle. With a narcissist, it's that, slides on the Mr. or nice guy or Ms. nice person mask, and then boom, it comes off and everything changes. The intermittent reinforcement again. So those with insecure attachment foundations will unfortunately respond more intensely to these circumstances. Isn't it hard to get over anyone though? Well, yes, to varying degrees for people it will be hard to get over anyone though, as you put it, but not in the sense of what trauma bonding really is in that neurochemical soup I just but barely described some of, and the fact that it becomes an addictive situation, because in healthier relationships, people usually aren't carrying around the same kind of woundedness or trauma from their childhoods as well. So it's a mix of things. In healthier relationships, when people break up, or it's often much more mutual, or if it's not mutual, it's at least discussed, and it has that really important difference, not always, but often, of closure, or some sense of closure. And so it can be hard to get over any relationship breakup, very true, but not in the same way that it is hard to get out of a trauma bond and really move forward and do the healing required to not still be having the overhope or still be having the withdrawal. Because like I was just explaining there, it's really bigger than what one's thinking. It overrides. It's the brain overriding your intellectual process of knowing that somebody isn't good for you. This doesn't tend to happen in other types of relationships, but it happens with the so-called cluster B personality disorder for those who get trauma bonded with them. So you know, you're in a trauma bonded situation with your family of origin, and I think it's really important to note that that's exactly what I was describing in many ways. That's how so many people feel. But you make very good points there, Wheels, and so it really is what's happened to your system. It's what's going on in your brain. It's not what's just going on in your psychology or your emotions. But you know, whenever the brain has these different kinds of reactions, along with protective reactions of fight, freeze, or fawn within the amygdala, you know, the reptilian brain, wow, you know, you can't just think your way out of it. That's the problem. And you said that's me, PTSD, not going back. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that you're really resolute that you're not going back. Sorry to hear you have the PTSD, though. New here. I've been sick for almost 5 years because of my ex. Oh, well, welcome, but I'm sorry to hear that. Watched a lot of my videos, thought I was going nuts and just not good enough. It was tough and still is. Just new here. Hello. Well, like I said, yeah, I'm sorry to hear it's tough. It is tough for a while. This is why people really do need to seek out some therapy and some help with this, because it's very complicated and it's hard for people, you know, when you're overrun by emotion and the neurochemicals in your brain and the amygdala's response to all of this. One is so overwhelmed, you know, people can often, you can't think your way out of it. That's the difficulty there. But welcome again to the channel. Always nice to see somebody new. That's something that can be quite the issue. And you know, I wonder if anybody here has experienced this. And Wheels is kind of, not, and that's really sad and tragic. And I'm one of those people, by the way, that, you know, I really have, you know, I really had that dysfunctional family of origin. And, you know, I don't know how I figured this out when I was in therapy like 3 decades plus ago. Because there was no internet to say go no contact. There were no books. But, you know, I think somewhere inside we can have this intuition of knowing. But again, it's really difficult because of different relationships. Like when I was leaving my family of origin, when I went no contact with them, you know, that's parents, it's like really difficult and painful. But of course, people have to go through this process to be able to get free. And among all the other steps required and the healing and recovery journey required to really get free, you need to break the trauma bond. And to break the trauma bond means going no contact.